Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a fascinating reality that, honestly, we've almost completely forgotten. For thousands of years, the absolute most powerful force controlling human civilization wasn't a massive empire or even money. It was sunset. The exact moment that last bit of orange light disappeared, entire worlds just stopped. Markets emptied out, roads fell completely silent, and millions of people accepted a daily reality that we, in the modern world, almost never experience. And I am talking about real darkness here, not just dimness, not the glow of a streetlight or the faint hum of a distant city. We are talking about darkness so absolute that on a moonless night you literally couldn't see your own hand stretched out in front of your face. But here's the thing. Something really strange and wonderful happened inside that darkness. People didn't just go straight to sleep, as we'll see. They spent hours telling stories, praying, repairing their tools, making music, studying the stars, or simply waiting for dawn. Entire religions completely reshaped their rituals around it. Criminals learned to use it. Architects designed whole buildings because of it. Even the human body seems to have evolved right alongside it. The night wasn't just the absence of daylight, it was an entirely different civilization. And you know what? Perhaps the strangest part of all this is that the world our ancestors inhabited after sunset stayed practically unchanged for thousands of years. I mean, think about it. Empires rose and collapsed, languages disappeared entirely, religions spread across vast continents. But once that sun vanished, a Roman merchant, a Viking farmer, a Tang Dynasty scholar, a medieval monk, an Aztec priest, they all stepped into a version of the exact same ancient night, a world completely ruled by darkness. So, if darkness controlled nearly half of every human life, why do we spend so little time talking about it? Well, mostly because electricity didn't just give us light. It totally erased an entire way of living. The deeper we look into this life after sunset, the stranger that forgotten world actually becomes. It was a place where nighttime silence could carry sounds for astonishing distances. And the stars? They weren't just pretty decorations up there. They were maps. The night sky itself functioned as essential technology. It was literally humanity's oldest navigation system. It connected sailors, traders, pilgrims, and explorers across vast oceans and deserts, centuries before the compass was ever widespread. Without those stars, entire civilizations might never have even found each other. But of course, right beneath those very same navigational stars lurked something just as powerful, and that was fear. Not just the standard fear of criminals or wild animals, but a deep fear born from uncertainty. You see, when vision disappears, the imagination gets a whole lot louder. Ancient Egyptians actually believed the sun god Ra battled chaos every single night before sunrise. Over in Mesopotamia, they thought darkness belonged to dangerous supernatural forces. Across medieval Europe, church bells rang in the evening not just to tell time, but to signal that a completely different kind of world had just begun. And in Japan, folklore filled the dark with yokai, these supernatural beings that were said to emerge the second human sight became unreliable. People genuinely behaved like the night demanded totally different rules. And honestly, it often did. Okay, let's dive into this, because long before you could just flick on a lamp, every single flame had to be earned. You had to gather the wood, render the animal fat, harvest the beeswax, press the olive oil, and twist the wicks totally by hand. Just getting a single evening of light meant hours of grueling labor. It made medieval illumination the ultimate luxury expense. This simple economic reality basically shaped every aspect of life after sunset. Most ordinary households simply couldn't afford to waste it. Artificial light was incredibly precious, tightly rationed, and carefully managed. Which kind of begs the question, what exactly did people do for the 12 or 14 hours each winter night when they just couldn't afford enough light? Well, the answer actually challenges one of our deepest assumptions about human history. Because before electricity, the night wasn't empty at all. It was astonishingly busy. The second the sun slipped below the horizon, outdoor labor, things like plowing and harvesting, had to stop because it was just too dangerous. But indoors, a whole new economy woke up. Women would spin wool into thread beside tiny oil lamps. Families would repair their valuable clothing. Fishermen mended torn nets, and craftsmen sharpened their tools. And crucially, storytelling absolutely flourished. Darkness quietly created humanity's oldest classroom. Sitting around a single fire, myths turned into history, history became memory, and that memory became identity. But while villages were drawing closer together around the fire, cities were transforming in a very different way. Today, obviously, cities come alive after dark, but before electricity, the exact opposite was usually true. Streets in massive places like London, Paris, Rome, Cairo, and Beijing got dramatically quieter and way more dangerous. Without streetlights, just a broken wheel, an unseen ditch, a loose horse, or even a single wrong step could easily be fatal. And actually, this is exactly where the word curfew comes from. It traces all the way back to the Norman French phrase couvre-feu, which literally means cover the fire. Originally, it was an evening bell telling households to put out their hearth fires so they wouldn't accidentally burn down the city, but it eventually evolved to mean restricting nighttime movement itself. Still, we probably shouldn't picture every ancient city as some kind of lawless nightmare. Civilizations adapted by learning how to manage the dark. European towns hired night watchmen to patrol the neighborhoods. Over in parts of the Islamic world, lantern guards would call out the hours and warn people of any danger. And Chinese cities across several dynasties, as well as Japan during the Edo period, they developed these incredibly elaborate systems of neighborhood responsibility and organized patrols just to prevent fires and keep things secure. But here's the catch. Adaptation required light. And like we talked about, light was incredibly expensive. So you get this huge economic divide. The wealthy could illuminate their grand halls using beeswax candles, which burn nice and bright and clean. But beeswax cost a fortune. Most ordinary working families had to rely on tallow candles, which were just made from rendered animal fat. They flickered, they smoked horribly, and frankly, they smelled like a burning slaughterhouse. Making or buying enough of those candles to light even an average room for the evening was a massive annual expense for a working family. So darkness was literally a profound economic force. The rich could simply purchase longer evenings, while the poor had no choice but to accept shorter ones. Even literacy itself reflected this massive economic divide. Think about it. Reading after sunset required not just an education, but affordable light. Books were already wildly expensive, but illuminating them so you could actually read them cost almost as much. This is a huge reason why monasteries became such extraordinary centers of learning. Monks would copy manuscripts by daylight whenever they could, but any nighttime work required those highly valuable candles. Every single page copied after sunset literally consumed resources. Words had a very real price, and it was measured in wax. Now, what's really interesting here is how this whole reality challenges everything we think we know about how humans rested. We usually just assume people have always slept 8 uninterrupted hours, right? Well, back in the 1990s, historian Roger Ekirch uncovered hundreds of historical references describing a first sleep and a second sleep. The evidence from medieval and early modern Europe shows that a lot of people fell asleep shortly after dusk, woke up completely naturally around midnight for an hour or two, and then went back to bed until dawn. And during that quiet waking interval in the middle of the night, people prayed, visited their neighbors, threw some extra wood on the fire, thought about their dreams, or used the time for intimacy. Now, while historians still debate just how universal this biphasic sleep really was across different climates and social classes, the historical records point to something extraordinary. Our modern, back-to-back, uninterrupted sleep might not actually be humanity's natural default. And there's modern science to back this up. In the 1990s, psychiatrist Thomas Wehr ran experiments where volunteers lived for weeks in winter-like darkness, totally cut off from artificial evening light. The result? No way, right? Many of the participants naturally developed 2 distinct periods of sleep, separated by a calm waking interval. The human body is perfectly capable of adopting this divided rhythm. So, hey, if you ever find yourself wide awake at 2 a.m., you might not even have insomnia. You could just be feeling the echoes of your ancestors' second sleep. But while most people generally feared the dark, a select few completely mastered it. Sailors were out there navigating whole oceans by stars that are completely invisible beneath today's city lights. Desert caravans intentionally traveled at night just to escape the punishing daytime heat. Astronomers mapped the heavens with mind-blowing precision using nothing but their bare eyes. Hunters tracked their prey by moonlight, and priests meticulously timed their sacred ceremonies to specific celestial events. The night wasn't just something to be endured. For the people who really understood it, darkness was this incredibly vital tool for survival, for science, and for religion. They didn't just survive the night, they completely belonged to it. But then, in the span of little more than a century, humanity practically defeated the night in this rapid escalation. Ancient Rome had managed to light up parts of their public spaces with simple oil lamps. By the 17th century, cities like Paris and Amsterdam had installed thousands of street lanterns. But the real game changer hit in the 19th century with coal gas lighting. Suddenly, factories and streets were flooded with light. And finally, by the late 1800s, inventors like Joseph Swan and Thomas Edison rolled out commercially viable electric lighting systems. For the very first time in history, the night no longer belonged to nature. It belonged to whoever could flip a switch. And the consequences of that flip of a switch reached way beyond just mere convenience. Electricity literally dissolved our natural limits. It fundamentally altered human labor forever. Factories didn't have to rely on daylight anymore, so production just kept going right into the evening. Hospitals could provide reliable care all night long. Railways extended their schedules, and newspapers started printing straight through the dark. This was the birth of the 24-hour economy. Darkness used to impose a hard limit on our ambition, but electricity completely wiped that out, replacing our natural rhythms with continuous, non-stop night shifts across manufacturing, transportation, and healthcare. So the crucial point is that this transformation didn't just change our work schedules. It fundamentally rewired our bodies. Modern chronobiology shows us the immense hidden impact of this shift. You see, exposure to darkness naturally stimulates your brain to produce melatonin, which regulates your sleep. But bright, artificial light, especially that blue-rich light we're all so used to now, suppresses melatonin and tricks your brain into thinking it's time to be awake. Electricity reached directly into our biology. The exact same invention that let us read after sunset also completely changed when millions of people slept, ultimately creating serious long-term health risks for shift workers due to chronic circadian disruption. And those trade-offs absolutely didn't stop at our biology. They extended right up into the sky itself. The exact same streetlights that made our cities safer also hid the stars. Today, because of severe light pollution, a massive majority of people living in North America, Europe, and increasingly across Asia can't even see the Milky Way anymore. To put that into perspective, for most of human history, generations built entire calendars, navigated oceans, and wrote incredible poetry by that magnificent expanse of stars. Now, for a lot of kids, it basically only exists in photographs. Astronomers consider this one of the greatest unintended consequences of modern lighting. We also lost the profound silence of the night. Before we had this constant, endless background hum of modern infrastructure, nighttime had an acoustic quality that is almost unimaginable to us today. Sound traveled so much farther and carried so much more meaning. The distant bark of a dog, the creak of wooden beams, wind rushing through the trees, church bells ringing, or even just echoing footsteps. Darkness demanded an incredibly acute awareness. It sharpened our hearing and our patience because survival often depended on noticing those tiny, subtle changes. But electricity gradually swapped out that sharp survival-based awareness for absolute certainty. Darkness used to be our default. Today, a power outage just feels like an unnatural interruption. The people who lived before electricity weren't just sitting around in the dark waiting for the modern world to come rescue them. They organized their entire societies around the oldest clock ever known, the sun. They measured time, worked, prayed, traveled, and even slept completely differently. The night shaped their civilization just as surely as rivers shaped their cities. And then, almost overnight, that ancient partnership ended. We often like to say that electricity brought light into the darkness, but history suggests something even more remarkable. It brought humanity out of one world and into another. The old night never truly disappeared, though. It survives in those rare places where the lights finally go out, and we can see the exact same stars that watched over every generation before us. But as we continue to flood our world with artificial light, we really have to ask, in our endless quest to banish the dark, what essential parts of ourselves have we left behind in the shadows?